Near-death experiences are a really fascinating topic, and they do have a lot of implications and significance for discussions about consciousness and life in general. In fact, I think the implications could be really game changers in a lot of ways. Near-death experiences, for those who don't know, near-death experiences, there are some misconceptions about what a near-death experience is. Some people understand a near-death experience to be like a close call with death. Like, for example, if someone was driving into an intersection and someone almost hit them. That is not a near-death experience at all. There is a more technical term. Near-death experiences occur when the physical body is actually near death, when the potential for death is, razor thin. So like if someone had a cardiac arrest, for instance, and they had the experience, that would be a near-death experience. The experiences themselves, they are associated with highly vivid, transformative experiences. And there are a lot of commonalities in these near-death experiences. So very generally, the most common things that people report in near-death experiences, they'll report traveling down a tunnel with a light at the end of it, hence the phrase, the light at the end of the tunnel. They'll report encountering an eternal being of infinite light and love, and out-of-body experiences, which can happen outside of near-death experiences, but they tend to happen very frequently in near-death experiences. People will often talk about meeting dead relatives, and the experience of having virtually infinite or universal knowledge, or knowledge that is a bounty of knowledge that is almost immediately at their disposal. So near-death experiences have become an emerging field of research in the past few decades. And part of this is because, a lot of this is because of breakthroughs and progress in medical science, we've become better at bringing people back from the brink of death. So things that normally would have killed someone, or almost certainly killed someone many decades ago, like cardiac arrest, heart attack, stroke, things like that. Whereas in decades past, they would have killed a person. Now, these days, there's a very, very good chance that with the help of medical technology, we can bring them back. And as it happens, this has a lot of powerful implications, and that is that now we have a growing population of people who have had these near-death experiences and are able to talk about it and talk about that experience in numbers that are enough to justify scientific inquiry. So prior to, the 1970s and 80s, near-death experiences weren't really a topic of discourse at all. They just weren't really known. And Raymond Moody's book, I forget what year it was, but I think it was in the late 1970s. He essentially coined the term near-death experience, and that made it much more visible to the public, the concept of near-death experiences. So now that there are so many people in the world that have had near-death experiences, as I've said, now there are enough of them that we can actually study it in a scientific manner, because now whereas before there used to be very, very few, now there are thousands and thousands and thousands of them. And from what I understand, about 10 to 20% of people who have a cardiac arrest experience, they have a near-death experience of some kind. So to go into detail more about what a near-death experience is, it's helpful to talk about the commonalities between near-death experiences. But in general, it's any experience when a person is near death that is outside of the normal framework of what we think of as normal waking consciousness and normal reality. And so some of the common things that occur are a person traveling through a tunnel and encountering a light at the end of this tunnel. Hence the phrase light at the end of the tunnel. They very, very frequently report encountering an eternal being made of or who exudes tremendous light and unconditional love, the likes of which they often say they can't even begin to describe. A few of them that I've looked into, they would say they didn't even know that much love was even, that to love on that level was even possible. So that's pretty notable, pretty remarkable. Many times they will have out-of-body experiences, which can occur outside of near-death experiences under normal, otherwise normal, healthy circumstances. Doesn't have to occur or coincide with illness of any kind. They report seeing dead relatives and the experience of being connected to some kind of universal or access to universal knowledge, or being able to access it instantaneously. Some other features, some features of the out-of-body experiences. Well, to back up a little bit, so the out-of-body experiences, oftentimes what happens is it seems that the out-of-body experiences often occur initially in the near-death experience. So many times they will talk about the experience of leaving their body the moment the moment their heart stops, for instance, and rising towards the ceiling and seeing everything that's going on around them. And many stories are apparently corroborated by, doctors, family members, things like that. You could certainly call into question the scientific validity of these corroborated stories, but I'm not really going to touch on that here. Some interesting features of out-of-body experiences. So one thing that is common among people that have these experiences is 360-degree vision and heightened senses. And this is even consistent with what I've experienced. I've had out-of-body experiences before, and that is consistent with what I've experienced. Although I think out-of-body experiences in general, there is some diversity in the experience. Just like almost anything. I don't think that 360-degree vision is necessarily I don't think it's universal necessarily with out-of-body experiences, but apparently this is common among people who have reported out-of-body experiences, in addition to the heightened sense perceptions. And that brings us to the next thing about near-death experiences, and this goes hand in hand with some of the implications. And many times people will, especially those who are very skeptical, they will disregard these experiences as hallucinations or just as a product of a malfunctioning brain. What is interesting, though, is that the experiences, almost universally, not always, but most of the time, the experiencers, they say that the experience is more vivid than our normal consciousness. And sometimes they say it's hyper-real. That is That to me is very remarkable. That is... So for instance, when we go to sleep at night, typically we will dream. And our state of consciousness in that state is the vividness of the experience is relatively low. So when we wake up from sleep, we can compare the vividness of the dream state to this waking reality. And we say, well, this feels a lot more real than the dream state. And that's one of the ways in which we know that the dream state is not the real state, but that this is the real state, because it's more vivid and and for other reasons, this state this normal waking state is more consistent, and it's, in a sense, you could sort of call it like a recurring dream you wake up into, in a sense. I don't necessarily think that just because something is consistent and repeats itself, I don't necessarily think that makes it a connection to reality. I think that is just one potential feature of reality. So in the same way that normal waking consciousness is more vivid than the dream state when we're sleeping at night, it seems that the state of consciousness during near-death experiences is an order of magnitude more vivid than this waking state. And so that's why it's such an important, why there are such implications with that particular feature, the near-death experiences. So, of course, there are, again, speaking about the consistencies within the experience, near-death experiences, to our understanding, it isn't a feature of reality that we wake back into. And yet, we aren't so sure what happens after the physical body dies. To our knowledge, we've only had most of us seem to operate under the assumption that we've only had one life. But perhaps in the same way that the sleeper wakes back up into their normal state of consciousness, perhaps when we die, we will wake back up into another tier of reality that is even more real, and perhaps over some undetermined amount of time or timelessness, we will come back to a relatively lower state of consciousness in the same way that we go to sleep every night. That's all rank speculation, but I think it's interesting nonetheless. So another thing that skeptics point out, so they will say that this experience is produced by a malfunctioning brain. It's very common to hear that. And I don't necessarily think that that's wrong, but my impression is that near-death experiences, and by extension, consciousness, is far more complicated than that. or at least not necessarily more complicated, but maybe far more simple than that. So the impression I've gotten is that the brain isn't so much a simulator of reality per se. It seems like what may be the case is that the brain is more of a regulatory device, like a filter in some sense. So when people have these out-of-body experiences and these near-death experiences, so allegedly when these experiences are happening, the person is, they're in a state where there should be nothing going on at all. There should be no consciousness. So these states are, and they've observed this over and over, these experiences seem to occur when there is measured zero brain activity as it is measured. The heart is not working, the heart is stopped, and there's no brain activity. So in this state, our scientific understanding is that there should be no consciousness, and yet we bring them back and they are able to tell us these things that have happened to them. And typically when the lights go out, it's in a lot of people's cases, it's only for a few minutes. But when people come back from the experience and talk about it, in some cases, the experiencer is able to recount details that they say happened over a much more extended period of time. So there's one that's available, and it's on YouTube. This near-death experiencer, he went on what he described as a 2-hour tour of heaven. Or he said that it felt like it was 2 hours. But he said that it was so crazy to him because he was only out for like 5 or 6 minutes, something like that. 5 to 10 minutes, I forget what the exact number was, but apparently he was only gone for a few minutes. And yet his near-death experience had the perceptual appearance of lasting what would be around 2 hours here on Earth. So during these experiences, time does not flow quite the same way as in this waking state of reality. So as far as the medical understanding of near-death experiences, typically physicians and neuroscientists, I don't have numbers, but the typical understanding is that consciousness produces, that the brain produces consciousness, and so this is the model, this is the explanation of near-death experiences. So the model of consciousness is that the brain is a sophisticated device that produces consciousness through a complex interaction of biological molecules and and tissues, with nerves conducting, impulses from nerve to nerve, and allegedly, according to the Western medical model, that is what produces consciousness. But Raymond Moody, in one of his talks that I saw recently, he pointed out that this is not a scientific fact. This is a philosophical position, and so far it is not a known fact that the brain produces consciousness. This is just the assumed understanding of the scientific establishment. So, and I don't think it's a conspiracy or anything. I think that this is just an understanding that has kind of fallen into place over time. Just an assumed understanding. So when a physician, they come out of medical school, they read all of their text, they do all of their exams, and it seems that just by virtue of going through all that schooling, by the time they come out the other side, that's just the assumption that that the brain produces consciousness. But particularly during the out-of-body experiences, it's not clear that the out-of-body experiences are actually out-of-body, but it does seem to indicate that there is something, especially if we assume or can prove that what they see during those experiences is corroborated, then we can conclude that something more complex and sophisticated is going on. But my base impression of what is going on is that the brain is more of and I touched on this just a couple minutes ago, but the brain appears to be more of a filter. So consciousness in its uninhibited state, it seems that consciousness in its uninhibited state is more of the boundless, infinite, eternal apparatus, maybe not apparatus, but entity that I've regarded in the past, and that it is self-regulation and self-imposed restrictions that create the reality, the waking reality that we know of. But again, that's just an impression. That's an assumption. So it is relevant to point out that these experiences associated with the near-death experience, they're not exclusive to the near-death state. They can be experienced in healthy states or relatively healthy states. Again, I mentioned out-of-body experiences, but there are other experiences outside of out-of-body experiences that can also occur during healthy waking states. And many of these they can occur during mystical experiences. So the experience of divine light and love that can occur during a near-death experience, that can certainly occur as well during a mystical experience or during a meditation of some kind. That can also occur. It's difficult to compare the vividness of the experience. In the context of near-death experiences, a lot of times people will describe the experience as the experience of being loved by this eternal being made of light and unconditional love. They're pretty superlative in their descriptions, like a supernova or being consumed by like a star. Maybe not consumed, but or like a love that is like 1,000,000 times greater than anything you'd experience on Earth. So they're pretty extraordinary descriptions. I'm not sure I could apply a number to it, but I can see during some of the mystical experiences that I've had, I can see how those extraordinary definitions can be used, because it's just so hard to describe. And that's kind of another feature of near-death experiences, is that virtually every single person will say, there are no words, but here I'm going to explain it anyway. So they just use the best words they can and use all the tools of their mental capacity to describe the experience. So it's another one of those experiences that's ineffable.